Welcome to my late summer garden, and what a summer it's been. Every year is just a little bit different, isn't it? Some plants doing better one year than they do the next. Some crops doing better and others not. But this year's been spectacular. It's been warm, it's been sunny, and it's certainly kept me busy watering the patio pots to keep them flowering and blooming to perfection. Not only have I enjoyed the flowers, but the bees have too, like on my lovely dwarf pineapple lily, or covering themselves with pollen from the gorgeous gay feathers. Tomatoes have been cropping well in the greenhouse and outside with bumper crops from one of my favourite outdoor varieties, the blight-resistant Mountain Magic. Lilies in pots have stolen the show, as they always do, like this double-flowered rose lily Chiara. And if you do like lilies, then do check out my video on how to grow lilies in pots. I've been collecting seed for my foxgloves, then sowing this by sprinkling a fine layer over compost in small pots, and these germinate in a matter of weeks to give me nice seedlings to grow on and plant out for future flowers. And I recently discovered a new shrub to me, this striking Escallonia Pink L. It was growing in the front garden of one of my neighbour's gardens. Now this is one plant I'm going to have to buy and find space for somewhere in my garden. If you're one of my loyal subscribers, then welcome back. But if this is your first time and you're new to my channel, then a very warm welcome, and I hope you enjoy this video. It's always a pleasure sharing my hints, tips, ideas and advice with everyone. So please give this video a thumbs up and hit that subscribe button right away and subscribe to my gardening channel. There's plenty more videos on my channel for you to enjoy too. So what's coming up in the video today? I'll introduce you to one of my favourite flowers for late summer colour, this lovely perennial sunflower Helianthus lemon gem, a hardy variety that will come back year after year. There are plants to care for, like this lovely begonia mocha pink shades, deadheading to keep the colour coming. Tomatoes are ripening up nicely, and I'll show you one of the biggest I grow called Super Sauce and why it really lives up to its name. If you don't grow dwarf Alstroemeria in pots, then you should, and I'll show you two varieties I grow that come back bigger and better year after year. Once Agapanthus have finished flowering, they can be deadheaded, and I'll show you how I do it and tell you how to look after your plants after flowering. And I'll introduce you to the summer hyacinth, this beautiful Galtonia candicans, and tell you why you should grow it to fill the summer colour gap. Plus, just how do you win the war against slugs and stop them eating everything in sight? Well, I've been putting a new beer trap to the test, and I'll tell you how it's performed. There's plenty more coming up in this video too, so let's get started with one of my favourite bulbs for summer pots. I always grow a few pots of lilies, and I've had sunny Martinique for a few years now. It's a dwarf variety, it only grows to about probably a couple of foot in height, but produces these beautiful open pink blooms. You've got the anthers here covered in pollen at the tips of the shoots, and this is one reason why, if you've got cats visiting your garden or you own a cat, don't grow lilies. Cats can be poisoned by the pollen from lilies, so you don't want these sorts of varieties. You can get double flowered varieties and ones which are pollen free, but a variety like this wouldn't be suitable if you've got cats around. I don't have cats, and so I enjoy growing lilies in my garden. And dwarf compact ones like sunny Martinique are ideal for growing in patio pots. Plant the bulbs in the spring, enjoy the display through the summer, and once these flowers have finished blooming, I'll literally cut the tip of the old flower stem off. I'll let the leaves die down naturally through the summer, and then I'll leave the bulbs in the pots of dry compost over the winter and replant them in the spring. So if you've got room, next springtime, round about February to March, check the bulb catalogues, check the mail order suppliers, treat yourself to some lilies to brighten up your summer display. If you're looking for something a little bit different to grow on your summer patio, then check out these beautiful Galtonia candicans called the summer hyacinth. Grows from a bulb which you'll plant in the spring. It will be in the spring bulb catalogues, usually planted around about March or April time. I'll start mine off in pots in my unheated greenhouse, but you could plant them straight out in the borders if you want. And it gives you colour in the middle of summer. Usually July into August time it will start to bloom, and it fills what they sometimes call is the August colour gap, because the main flower borders have finished blooming. The lupins are over, the delphiniums are over, and there can be a little bit of a gap in the middle of summer, and that's when Galtonia comes into its own. Tall spires of bloom grow to about just over 1 metre, perhaps 4 foot in height. Bells of white blooms opening from the base of the stem up towards the tip, flower in succession over several weeks, providing a lovely flowering plant. There's a companion here with Agapanthus, giving you that high summer colour and interest. I like them in pots, and I can just take this pot and put it in my greenhouse to die down over the winter, replant the bulbs in the spring, but you could plant them out in your borders if you wanted. I'm not sure how hardy the bulbs are, particularly in a rather wet soil, but I would prefer to lift them if I'd put them out in the garden and then plant them up and enjoy a beautiful display of these white hanging bells of bloom through the middle of summer to give you some extra interest on your patio. Regular deadheading is an important part of maintaining flowering performance in lots of summer bedding plants like pelargoniums or geraniums. And if you see flowers starting to fade, you should just snap off the old flower stems and make room for new ones. So once the old ones are finished, you'll find you've got lovely new flowers developing from the tips of the shoots. But another time that I remove the flowers is just before I'm going to go on holiday or away for a week or so, because you're not going to be around to deadhead while you're away. And if I leave the flower heads on the plants, I go on holiday, then these will age, the petals will fall, the fallen petals can start to rot and deteriorate and cause dead patches on the leaves. What's quite a good idea to do just before you go on holiday is to remove the flowers which are fully open, and by the time you get back from your holiday, especially if you're going away for a fortnight, the buds which are there now will have grown up and opened to welcome you home. So if you're going to go away, just go around the plant and take off any of the flowers. I know it seems a shame, but by removing these, it's making way for the new flowers to develop and encouraging new ones to develop further down the plant as well. So for summer holiday maintenance, particularly of plants like pelargoniums, just take off all of the flowers which are fully open now. Leave the display as it is, and when you get back, won't it be lovely to see all of these buds fully open to welcome you home. And 10 days later, I'm back from my holiday and a new flush with beautiful pelargonium flowers has developed. So this is something you can do on lots of your summer bedding plants. If you're going away, take off any older flowers, leave the nice young budded shoots to develop and open up, and on your return, you'll be welcomed back by a beautiful flowering display. I've planted a centrepiece Yucca gloriosa variegata in the centre of some of my patio pots, and around the outside I'll put a different bedding plant between summer and winter. So in the summer I've got a lovely Nemesia at the moment, looking gorgeous around the Yucca, and in the winter, well, I'll probably get rid of these plants October-ish time and replace with some violas or some pansies to give me some winter colour. You probably know these Yuccas, they've got a really sharp tip at the end of their leaves, so do be careful if you're leaning over your plants. That's one reason this is called Adam's needle, as its common name. But they look really impactful in pots. They give you a centerpiece to enjoy all year round, and you can change the bedding display between summer and winter. I do like to grow some flowers around my kitchen garden too. Got my outdoor tomatoes here, and I've planted this lovely cosmos called Symphony Pink, which is producing beautiful flowers which the bees, got a bumblebee here feeding from the bloom, really enjoying feeding from. These will give you a really long flowering season. It's a hardy annual, but you've got a regularly dead head. So I've got new flowers coming, but any of these slightly faded flowers you've got to pick off. So if you find any flowers which have actually finished, like one down here, which is actually lasted, just pinch them off, cut them off completely. You've got new buds developing, new flowers opening. So as soon as the old flowers are faded, pinch them off. That encourages more flowers to develop. And these flowers will bring in beneficial insects like hoverflies to feed on the pollen and the nectar, as well as bees and other beneficial insects too. So certainly worth planting. Some hardy annuals of some sort, or a perennial which has a long flowering season, which has these beautiful open single blooms, perfect for the insects to gain access to feed from the pollen and the nectar. That brings in the insects and actually adds some colour to your kitchen garden too. I'm always on the lookout for new plants to grow in my garden, and this summer I found a red hot poker called Kniphofia Poco Citron. Isn't it beautiful? And if you want to find out a little bit more about this variety, check out a special YouTube video I've developed just on this wonderful new variety. And you can find this on my YouTube channel, Adam's Gardening Guides. If you ask me what my favourite long flowering hardy perennial is, then I find it's hard to beat Alstroemerias. These are two of my favourites. They're a dwarf compact variety of Alstroemeria. This one is called Sunshine, and this one is called Havana. And I just grow them in small pots, and the height of them, they only put on about a foot of growth during the year, but they're quite hardy, and they flower repeatedly through the year. When a flower stem has finished and the flowers have fallen, you just grasp the stem, pull it sharply from the base. You can see where the old flowers have finished there. So once that flower stem is finished, just pluck it up, pull it away from the rhizome inside the compost, and new stems come up. So this will go on flowering. Started flowering probably around about beginning of June, now through July, through August, and this will go on right the way through into autumn, giving you a beautiful succession of flowers. And the other thing is, the bees love these blooms too. There are so many flowering bulbs we can grow in pots, from lilies to summer hyacinth, but I think that the pineapple lily, or Eucomis, is one of my favourites. This is sparkling Burgundy. Had it in a pot for a few years now. Grows from a bulb, plant it in the spring. It will come up and give you flowers through from high summer through into autumn. And these flower spikes are gorgeous. On sparkling Burgundy, the stem is a deep burgundy colour. The leaves can sometimes be a darker burgundy colour too. And the flower spikes start opening at the base up towards the tip. So this gives you flowers over many, many weeks through into autumn time. Each individual flower is absolutely gorgeous. They're little star-shaped blooms. Every head carries dozens of these. 6 petals around the outside, little golden stamen shining out from the centre. And there's a lot of different varieties of Eucomis that you can get. I think sparkling Burgundy is a favourite of mine. Growing here to about 4 foot or so in height, growing in its pot. Could grow it in a border, but I think growing in pots is ideal. Plant the bulbs in the pots in the spring, grow them outside for the summer, then I just move those pots to my greenhouse for the winter, stop watering, let the foliage die down completely. In the spring you can just clear away that old foliage, start watering and start them back into growth, which is exactly what I did with this pot earlier in the year. If after a few years you've got a bigger clump of bulbs, because sometimes one bulb turns into 2 or 3 over the course of the year, 3 turn into 5 or 6, and after a few years you'll have a big congested pot of bulbs. In the spring you could knock them all out, repot them, divide them up, and perhaps one pot produces 2 pots of bulbs. So this sparkling Burgundy is a favourite, enjoys a sunny position. It also, I find, needs a little bit of support, so I've put some short canes into this pot, tied some string around just to hold these stems upright. The heads can get quite heavy, and if you get a lot of wind or rain during the summer, the stems can tip over and bend down. They can look quite attractive, or almost turning into swans' necks as they bend around. But if you want to keep them upright, I think a little bit of support is really handy. But if this is a little bit too tall for you, I've got an answer, and that's with this lovely little dwarf Eucomis layer. Short and compact, only growing to about a foot in height. I've had this in a pot for several years now, and as you can see, there's quite a mass of bulbs in there now. So I think this coming winter I'm going to let it die down, and in the spring I'm going to tip the whole thing out and divide it up into smaller bulbs. Now, I always thought Eucomis were particularly trouble-free. They don't tend to get green fly and black fly, and most pests, I thought, left them alone. But this year I made the mistake of leaving this little Eucomis on my patio on the ground, and I went out at night when I was doing my nightly slug search, and this is what I found. And just look at this, my lovely little dwarf Eucomis, and there are the slugs eating away, having their midnight feast, making these holes in the leaves. So I've got to pick these off and get rid of these nasty slugs. This makes it all worthwhile, coming out at night, checking over your plants. If you notice any damage on any leaves, it's worth then saying, right, there must be some slugs around, come out at night. And they've come out too, and this is when you'll catch them. They are literally all over this Eucomis. I found 2 and I turned the plant round and I found another couple on there. So they really have made a beeline for this little dwarf Eucomis. Now's the time to control these slugs. So do take care if you're growing Eucomis. Look out for slugs and snails, but otherwise I think these particularly trouble-free bulbs are really worth investing in. They will come back year after year, they'll gradually multiply too, and they'll give you tremendous flower displays to enjoy through those high summer and autumn days. What a larger cornus or dogwood at the edge of this border, but one of my favourite cornus or dogwood varieties is this little variety called Cornus Kelce's Gold. I don't think it's that widely available anymore. Only grows about 2.5 foot or so in height. It will lose its leaves in winter, but look at this beautiful golden leaf. It really brightens up this border throughout the year, and then the leaves take on some more orange and brown tones as we move through autumn before the leaves eventually fall. Now, if you want, you can take hardwood cuttings of cornus in the winter, and I've done that with some others. I took some cuttings last winter and those have rooted, and I've managed to replicate the parent plant, and I've got some others coming along here. You can just see how the beautiful colours turn as we move through the season, adding some extra interest. But this plant really shines out in your borders. It's very manageable. In the winter I'll just give it a trim over, either taking some cuttings or trimming it back a little bit more to keep it a manageable size. I've got it towards the front of my border here alongside a geranium, ground covering geranium, Himalayancy, and here that lovely also the sedum. This is called Mr. Goodbud, just coming into flower at the front of my border. And if you like the stone crops or ice plants or sedums, as well as Mr. Goodbud, I've got this lovely variegated leaf variety called Lajos, which really does brighten up the display. And I find these are good towards the front of borders. They're very manageable, they stay compact basically. There's another little variety called Thundercloud alongside it, and I plant these alongside of my borders. I'm always looking for flowers in my garden which are hardy and perform really well. And this hardy perennial is a variety of the perennial sunflower family. It's Helianthus. This is called Lemon Queen, that starts flowering through August, well into September, and produces a succession of these beautiful golden daisy-shaped flowers. They open flower after flower after flower, giving you weeks of beautiful performance. And it starts flowering, as I say, in around about August time. It will grow in good conditions to about 5, maybe even 6 foot in height. It spreads as a clump to fill your borders. So it's a great plant to put towards the back of the flowering displays in your borders. Or here in my garden, I've got a corner spot. I need a little bit of height and impact. And it grows really, really well. In the winter, it just dies down to ground level, grows up in the spring, puts on a lovely thicket of growth through the summer months, and as we move through August, the first flowers will start to open. And being a lovely single open flower, it brings in the bees. The bees adore feeding from the flowers, so you'll find it's alive through these late summer months into autumn, keeping the bees happy. And it also feeds hoverflies that can feed from their single flowers. The hoverfly adult will be feeding on the pollen and nectar in these blooms, and it will produce, as I say, many, many weeks of superb flowering performance and come back year after year. So this is really highly recommended. Lemon Queen, the perennial sunflower, and a member of the Helianthus family. I do hope you're enjoying this video, and if you are, please give it a thumbs up and subscribe to my channel by clicking the button below. There's plenty more inspiring videos on my channel, Adam's Gardening Guides. Thank you. I was looking for something else to grow along the front of my border. It's quite dry soil here underneath a variegated holly, and I've always wanted to grow this little variety of spurge or euphorbia called Martinique. Just low ground covering variety, will just spread out along the front of my path. Flowered a little bit earlier in the year. New growth will be carried right the way through the whole of the year and through the winter. These stems will carry flowers next spring, and then those will die back and new growth will come through. So these little euphorbias are perfect towards the front of the borders. And here alongside here I've got that lovely geranium roseanne. The bees adore it as well. This is a variety of hardy cranesbill or geranium, completely hardy variety, comes back every year. It will die down completely in the winter, cut it all back, but the new stems will come up through the spring, and then by this time of year you'll have a succession of flowers carried right the way through into the winter. I've also been propagating my strawberry plants. Any runners that have been produced, I've just taken the runner away from the parent plant, pegged the tip of it into a small pot to propagate the strawberries, and some of those runners, even though they're only just rooting, are already starting to flower and fruit. So I'll have more pickings from this year's strawberry runners to enjoy in a few weeks' time. This is Nepeta Blue Prelude. It's a new hardy perennial I was tempted to buy recently, and I'm going to plant this out in one of my borders. It's got new shoots coming at the bottom, so I'll have more hopefully side shoots and flowers coming as I go through the year. But a hardy perennial like this, which grows to about 18 inches or so in height, will give me flowers through the summer. I've got a little hoverfly around here enjoying the blooms too. This is something which, once the flowers have faded, just deadhead promptly, just snip off these old flower heads and encourage new ones to form. And also, if you deadhead back, you can get side shoots growing, or these lower shoots at the bottom will grow up too, to keep the flowering display going through summer. So I'm looking forward to finding a sunny position for blue prelude to put into my borders. There's a lot of different varieties in Peter or catmint that you'll find, but this hardy perennial is certainly one to enjoy growing, and is going to give me good flowering displays through the summer months, usually flowering from around about June through until September. Quite often when I come out at night with my head torch on, just checking around the pots and the borders for slugs and snails, I'll find them either along the edge of the lawn here alongside my main flower border, or even earlier in the year the slugs feeding on the cornice, or slugs and snails on the plants in the borders. So I decided to put one of these Slug-X beer traps in the border. This is a little trap which you fill with beer, and hopefully it attracts the slugs into it to drink on the beer and drown in the beer too. So I put this here literally 2 nights ago, and checking it now, I've already got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 or 11 slugs in the trap itself, which proves that slug traps really do both attract and catch slugs. So now I can take these and dispose of them, but I'm going to refill it with some fresh beer and put it back in the border. So perhaps you've got an area of your garden alongside your veg plot, on your patio, near your flower borders, somewhere else you could put one of these traps. Very easily self-contained, little lid on it, but the slugs themselves can crawl up the side, get inside and feed on the beer which you've filled the trap with. You could try making your own beer traps just using some empty jam jars, sink them down to the soil, fill them with beer, but something like this is just a nice, neat idea, and clearly very effective too. Once it's refilled with beer, you can just nestle it back into your border. The slugs can get in these little holes at the side, so just going to put it there and leave the lid in place. Let's see if I've trapped any tomorrow. This mocha pink shades is a beautiful begonia, and good in a trough, pot, hanging basket, particularly in a shady spot like I've got here, but to keep it blooming right the way through summer. There's a few things you need to do. I mixed some slow release fertiliser into the compost when I planted this up, so I probably don't need to feed it anymore, but I do need to water, and I also need to deadhead. So as soon as flowers start fading, they need to be picked off. Like this one here, when the petals start fading, they need to be pulled off. Actually, sometimes they're quite heavy flower heads, sometimes they'll just pull away on their own. Other times you need to just give them a little bit of a twist and a pull, but do deadhead, because if you leave these faded petals falling on the leaves, they can cause dead patches. Like this one here, it's got a little bit of a split, a dead patch. So I'm actually going to take that leaf off completely, follow it back down to its base, and just give it a little bit of a snap at the bottom and just remove that leaf completely. And it's worth removing any leaves which are starting to brown. I've got another one down here. It's just a little bit brown. Just follow it back to its base, little bit of a snap, and pull that away. And any of the faded flowers, again, just remove them. Once all the flowers on a spike have finished, again, you can follow that little flower stalk back to its base, and that will pull away completely too. Just keep them tidied up. Any old flowers in the centre of the crown of the begonia, remove those at the same time. If the weather's been wet and the flower has fallen down onto the leaf, it tends to stick and cause the leaf to die. So particularly after rain, it's worth checking over your begonias. And if I'm watering, I never water over the top. I'll water from the bottom, water onto the compost, but I'm going to remove that leaf completely because that will just be dying back, and you want to neaten up the plant. Also on this variety, this mocha pink shades, the foliage can get quite dense and the flowers are forming underneath, so sometimes you just need to remove one or two of the leaves just to reveal the flower display which is being covered up, and give these flowers a little bit more room to grow. So it's worth just tweaking over your plants every few days, making sure that any faded flowers are removed completely and any damaged foliage or foliage which is masking blooms can also be removed. Now the last thing to do is a bit of watering. Oh no, a little dead leaf in there. Remove him up. Just lets more air into the plant as well. And then watering just every few days. Check the compost isn't drying out. You don't want the compost to dry out completely in your summer bedding plants. Any old leaves at the bottom can be picked off. Water from the top. Try not to wet the flowers and the leaves. Just water the compost on the top. Let that water soak down. Give it a really good water. And this way you'll keep this flowering display going right the way through until autumn. Fuchsias are lovely varieties for pots and baskets. You can get upright growing ones like this, you can get trailing ones to choose which are perfect in baskets, but they do need regular deadheading. The flowers last a reasonable length of time, but they'll gradually fade and dry, and you need to pick them off. If you've got them growing in a hanging basket, you can actually sort of shake the plants and sometimes these will fall off, but they'll often leave in place these little seed capsules or seed heads, or some people call them fuchsia berries. Some varieties like this one have started producing masses of them this summer. They don't always set and produce these, so when you're deadheading you pull them off, but if you do notice that you've got these little berries forming, then they really do need to be picked off or snipped off. The main thing is just to make sure each of these little capsules will be forming seeds. And you can find with a lot of bedding plants that if a plant is setting seed, it stops producing flowers. So to keep the blooming going, and here on the tip of this shoot we can see we've got the flower, we've got a capsule here forming which I can pinch off, and up at the tip of the shoot we've already got some more flower buds developing. So to keep the flowering going, it's important to pick it off. So this is a job regularly to do every few days. Just go over your fuchsias, developing on the plant itself. Faded flowers, and of course, in addition to that, watering and feeding with a high potash feed. Make sure you're encouraging good flowering and plenty more flowers to develop over the coming weeks and months. Growing crops in pots can be a great solution if you've got a limited amount of space to grow things outside. I do have the luxury of having some raised beds and some growing space in the garden, but I often start off the year by sowing a few crops in pots, like this plastic pot, just a 14-inch pot, very cheap and easy to buy. Make sure some drainage holes in the bottom, filled with compost, and you can use it for growing a whole range of things. But specifically I like growing salads early in the year, February, March into April, when conditions are still too cold outside to raise things. I can just sow a few crops of cut and come again salads, things like mizuna, rocket, lettuce, maybe baby beetroot leaves and so on. You can sow those in pots in a protected area. If you've got a conservatory or a porch or an unheated greenhouse, then those provide enough warmth during those early months in the year to get a crop growing. And cut and come again varieties of lettuce are an ideal thing to choose. They're very easy to look after while they're growing. Just make sure that you water regularly.
Make sure
because a lot of
your
these
plants
leafy
don't go
crops have a
short of
high
water.
demand for moisture. Regular watering is essential
at all.
And
So
if
make
you
sure
want,
you
can
keep the
mix up
moisture
up. And then specifically cut and come again varieties of lettuce rather than the heading varieties will provide regular pickings over a long period of time. The crops will, like this one, will eventually start to bolt, which means they run to seed and they'll stop cropping. But you will get pickings over several weeks from a single pot. And if you love your salads, then rather than just growing one pot, sow one pot, maybe in March, wait 4 or 5 weeks, then sow a second pot in April, wait a few more weeks, maybe even a third pot in May. And as one crop is coming up and growing, you've sown a second or a third to follow up and provide pickings over a long period of time. The Agapanthus have looked lovely through the summer months, but as we move through August, the flower starts to fade, and a lot of these heads now, the petals are starting to drop. This variety is called Blue Giant. It's a tall variety, forms really majestic plant with arching stems. I have given it some support to hold it upright, but the flowers are dropping. You could leave these seed heads in place. Some people do. They can look quite attractive. Little seed pods swell and they can colour up. And they can actually add and enhance your displays, but they will start sapping the plant of some strength. Any plant which is left to set seed will do that, and I would prefer to deadhead. Now, when I'm deadheading Agapanthus, I don't just snip off the flower heads like that and remove them and leave the stalks in place. I actually follow each of these stalks down to its base and prune it away at the bottom. So here we are now down at the base of the plant. This is actually the green stake which is in the corner of the pot, just supporting the plants, but the flower stem itself, the stalk, I follow down to the bottom. You'll have this crown of foliage coming out, and just with some sharp secateurs, get in there and just snip through and just cut off that flower stalk completely. Another one in here, just round on this side here. Again, just follow that flower stalk right the way down to the base. Let's get those leaves out of the way and just cut that away. And you can just continue around the plant now. Follow each flower stalk down in turn. These ones are pruned. We'll just snip these out. I've tied them in to give them a little bit of support as they grow, and then just go down. Leave the foliage. I'll leave that on, and these pots, they can be moved out of their prime position on the patio now. I'll continue watering and feeding right the way through until autumn. I tend to move my Agapanthus to my unheated greenhouse for the winter. I will stop watering, reduce the watering in the autumn. This foliage of this variety, Blue Giant, dies down completely during the winter. I'll let the foliage dry off. No water's needed over the winter. Just trying to protect the plant from that really wet, cold weather and snow. And then in the spring, I can start watering again. I'll have removed all of that old dry foliage right down at the bottom and start watering, start feeding, and the plant will come back into leafy growth, and I can move these pots back out onto the patio in the summer, enjoy the flower display next year. Now, I had been thinking that this plant was getting a bit congested and it might need to be knocked out and divided, but Agapanthus really like root congestion. Do you know, last year I only had about 3 flowers on it. I really thought the time had come when it needed to be knocked out of a pot and divided up. But this year I've had about a dozen flowers. I think I'm going to give it the benefit of the doubt next year and leave it and see how many flowers I get next year. If it's flowered this well and it looks this congested, then it's certainly worth leaving it just to see whether I get another beautiful flower display next summer. This parsley is continuing to grow at quite a pace, producing wonderful tall stems of these beautiful broad leaves. Love these broadleaf varieties of parsley, but they do need plenty of water, so something to do regularly, perhaps once a week, maybe twice a week if the weather's really hot. I'll give this bed a really good soak, making sure the water soaks deep down into the root zone and encouraging even more beautiful leafy parsley leaves to develop over the coming weeks. And these plants should go on producing leaves like this for the rest of the summer. If I get an excess of crops, quite often I'll pick these and chop them up and I'll freeze them. Parsley freezes really well. You can just use that for throwing into casseroles and things during the winter. And parsley is a crop which will grow up in a second year, but it will flower in its second year. So it shouldn't produce any flowering stems this year, but if you keep it growing for a second year, it will die down in the winter and come up. You get a few pickings earlier in the year, then it will run to seed, and then I'll probably leave 1 or 2 plants to set seed, save my seed and use that for growing future crops. These main crop potatoes are developing nicely. I did earth them up earlier in the season. They now produce some tall stems and actually starting to flower. But the most important thing to do to encourage the biggest possible yield and crop is to water. Don't let your potatoes run out of moisture. Give them a really good soak, particularly during dry weather. And I had a few really hot days here in my garden. I want to make sure I water well, so water soaks right the way down into the soil to reach the roots. And this will encourage the tubers which are developing to swell to their full size, which is what I want. Bigger potato tubers to harvest. You'll notice this if you drive around the country and you see farmers' crops of potatoes too. Quite often they've got those sprinklers shooting water out across the fields. Potatoes are one crop with a high demand for moisture. You can't grow it in drought conditions. You can't let it go short of moisture. Well, you'll end up with very few tiny little potatoes. What I want is a decent sized crop. I've only got a small space of them here, so I want to get some decent sized potatoes. So regular watering, possibly weekly I'll water just to really make sure that water soaks down right the way down into the soil. A little light sprinkling is of no use at all. All that's going to do is to wet the leaves and wet the soil surface. I want to make sure I'm watering well, hold the hose over the area, let that water soak down, make sure it really does soak down deeply into the soil to reach the roots, and that way you'll be encouraging the biggest crop of potatoes you can. Really looking forward to harvesting these later in the year. Got roses for picking, pears coming on nicely, probably giving me pickings later in October as those will ripen up. This pear is a variety called Concord, which is a hybrid. It was crossed between Conference and Eucomis, and very conference-like in flavour and in appearance, but gives you really good crops. And one thing I do like about this pear is it's self-fertile. So I've only got one pear tree and I can be guaranteed good crops every year. Now I know there's lots of varieties of cucumber you can get, but I do find Bella is an exceptional variety. Just look at the length and size of these fruits. Certainly ready to harvest now. Massive cucumbers. One developing from this leaf node and the next one up. So I've got a couple here now ready for picking. More fruits developing up the stem. And along here, another plant of cucumber Bella. So you're going to get a really generous crop and hopefully be picking cucumbers over many months through the summer. You can choose other varieties as well, and there's plenty of varieties to pick when it comes to cucumbers, but for its disease resistance, something which is going to make sure that these leaves don't go down with that fungus disease, powdery mildew, then I think Bella is certainly hard to beat. Now I've got a gardener's delight in my greenhouse. Did used to grow this one outside, but it will succumb to blight in the garden, and I do like gardener's delight as a tomato. Not ready for picking yet. If I move up a little bit here, there's some fruits just starting to colour up. So just a decent size, tasty summer tomato. Some people say Gardener's Delight's got one of the best flavours of any, so it's certainly something I try and grow at least one plant every year to put in my mix. And alongside it, I've got Sun Gold. And this golden variety, similar in many ways to Gardener's Delight. Doesn't ripen to red, ripens to orange, hence his name, Sun Gold. And it's a really, really tasty tomato. Exceptional flavour, another really good one to put in your mix. So if you want to just try and increase the range of varieties you grow, then maybe add a Sun Gold or a Gardener's Delight into your mix as well. For flavour, you won't be disappointed. If you're looking for something a little bit different, then perhaps Limoncito could be a tomato worth considering. Produces these little cherry tomatoes which don't ripen to red, they'll stay just a orangey yellow colour. Very, very sweet, excellent in salads, just give you another colour twist to your summer salads. But as you can see here, each truss produces dozens of little fruits. If I move up the plant here, we can see more fruits coming. This one here just right now, not quite ready for picking yet, but it will colour up just to that sort of pale lemon to orange colour, and then they'll be perfect, sweet, flavoursome, excellent in summer salads. Now I grow about half a dozen different varieties of tomatoes in my greenhouse. Just want the variety, some for cooking, some for salads, some for eating direct, some for making into sauces and soups and so on. This variety is called Akron, which I've grown in the past, and it produces some really, really big, heavy trusses of medium-sized fruits. I find this is a really high-yielding variety to grow in the greenhouse. I enjoy growing that. But one of the biggest tomatoes I grow is this one called Super Sauce. And it can produce fruits, I'm told, up to about 900 grams in weight. In my greenhouse, they don't get quite so big, but here's some I picked a couple of days ago. And these fruits are really, really decent size. This has grown to about 300 grams in weight. And this comparison, if you just look at a standard size tomato, which is about 45-50 grams, you can see the difference here. Really, really decent size fruits, and a good crop too. You might not get quite as many fruits on a truss as you get on a variety like Akron, but you've certainly got decent returns from this plant. So Super Sauce is one. Again, I've grown for a few years now, and I think this is a really good variety to add to your greenhouse collection. So let's have a look just as a comparison. This is Sun Gold, nice little salad tomato. Have a look inside. You can see fleshy tomato, very, very juicy. This is Akron, decent sized tomato. Actually, I'm going to cut it across that way there. Let's have a look. But as you can see, loads of seeds in this tomato. So tasty, lots of flavour. And how about Super Sauce? Let's have a look inside this. Now it's called a meaty, fleshy tomato. Let's have a look. Yes, as you can see, lots of beautiful flesh. A few seeds, 1, 2, 3, 4, half a dozen or so around in this cut section, but mainly fleshy, really good, particularly in comparison with a standard tomato. Fewer seeds, more flesh, perfect variety for cooking, and its name says. The name Super Sauce says it all. Great for making tomato sauces. Do keep checking over your plants every few days. Even when you've removed the side shoots, new ones will develop. So you've just got to be checking over regularly. If you spot any little side shoots like this growing out, you can just literally break them off and remove them completely. Look up here, I can see just some more developing up here as well. So it's already had a couple of side shoots removed, but these little ones here can be just gently snapped out. Use some scissors if you want to, or some secateurs if these are a little bit tight, but usually you can just pluck them off and remove them completely. You don't want plants to be wasting energy producing these side shoots when you want them to be producing flowers and fruits. The sweet corn is flowering with the male flowers at the top of the stems, which will be forming pollen. So these release the pollen drops down onto the tassels, which are the female parts of the flower. These tassels feed down into what will be the cob developing. So I'll be getting my sweet corn ripening up nicely, and that's why we grow sweet corn in a block, so that you've got the male flowers producing the pollen. The wind pollination will bring that pollen down onto the tassels, and then the tassels are attached to the cob, and these will lead to nice fattening cobs. Some of these plants have actually produced 2 or maybe even 3 cobs. This one here, I've got 1, 2, 3 cobs developing. So give these another few weeks, the cobs will swell, and then I'll be able to tell, once these tassels have turned brown and the cobs have swollen, you can feel how swollen the cob is, those will be ready for picking. So I'm looking forward in probably 3 or 4 weeks time to picking my own homegrown sweet corn. Once the courgettes are nicely established, the flowering and cropping gets into full swing, like on this primula variety here. And I've got 1 courgette ready to harvest. Cut that one off now. Decent sized one. I'm going to use that in my cooking tonight. I've got a male flower here and more female flowers, more little courgettes developing. So this variety is getting into good cropping mode. I should have lots to pick over the next few weeks. So remember to keep up with the watering as well. These crops will have quite high demand for moisture during the hot, dry weather. They're a very fleshy plant, and developing fruits requires quite a bit of moisture. So as we saw before, I've planted these courgettes in a little hollow, so if I water around the main stem of the courgette plant into that little moat, the water just soaks down nicely into the root zone. So this is something I'll do probably every day if the weather's really hot and dry, otherwise at least every 2 to 3 days. Give them a really good generous water, so that water really sinks down deeply into the rooting zone below. The blackberries have been magnificent. This was one of the first varieties I planted in a screen along in front of my greenhouse, and it's a variety of thornless blackberry. I do prefer the thornless ones than the thorny ones, give you some painless pickings as it were. This is called Loch Ness, and because it flowers over a long period, it produces fruit over a long period. So I've got some ready for picking, really decent sized fruits on this. I've got others which are just starting to swell, and others which are ripening up nicely. So this has given me pickings already for quite a few weeks, and I've probably got at least another month's worth of pickings from these. So again, really good, decent sized fruits to enjoy. These are a lovely, tasty variety of blackberry. There's a lot of different thornless ones on the market, but certainly worth checking out varieties like Loch Ness. Vigorous plants. I've already got the canes being produced, which are going to carry the fruit next year. So I've got 2 lots of canes. 1 lot have been carrying flowers and fruits this year, and next year's canes have been growing up from the base, coming up here now. And these canes will need to be tied in and trained in the autumn to carry next year's fruits, and at the same time I'll cut out completely those canes which fruited this year. So that's all for now from my late summer garden. I hope you've enjoyed this video. Plenty more videos coming up in the future, and lots more to check out on my channel at Adam's Gardening Guides. But for now, I've got some watering to do.